It was a misty morning in Bath when the bandages were finally removed from my eyes. The world that had once been a blur of shadows now shimmered with light. After 5 years of blindness, I could see again. The doctor smiled kindly, but all I could think of was one thing: Henry. My little boy. I'd lost my sight saving him. That day by the river, when his ball rolled onto the road, I ran without thinking. The sound of tires screeching, the impact, and then darkness. For 5 years, I lived in silence and shadow. But my love for Henry never faded. Every letter I dictated to Edward, every toy I sent, every lullaby I whispered in dreams, they were all for my son. And now, I was going home. Edward hadn't visited often. He said it was too hard for Henry. That he didn't understand. I believed him. I believed everything he said. He was my husband, after all. And Fiona, my best friend, she checked on me often. Sent photos of Henry, said he was growing so fast, so bright. She was the bridge between me and the world I couldn't see. Or so I thought. The taxi pulled into the drive of our home, the white cottage with ivy climbing up the bricks. I stepped out, heart pounding. The door was slightly open, laughter echoing inside. I tiptoed into the hallway. The air was filled with the scent of lilies, my favorite. Odd. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Perhaps Edward had guessed. I took a breath and stepped into the living room. And there they were. Edward. Fiona. And my son. Edward stood with his arm around her waist. Fiona, wearing my blue silk robe, turned and smiled sweetly at him. Henry sat curled next to her, resting his head on her shoulder. And then he said it. "Mum, can I have more juice?" Not to me. To her. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the doorframe to stay upright. But no one noticed. They were too wrapped in their little world. My world. I took a slow step back and exhaled quietly. I wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. So I did the only thing I could. I pretended I was still blind. For the next few days, I lived like a ghost in the very house I once called mine. I told them the operation hadn't worked. That I was still blind. Edward seemed relieved. He didn't hug me. He didn't even help me to my room. Fiona offered to make tea, too sweetly, as if I were a guest. And Henry, oh, Henry. He sat on the far end of the sofa, distant. Cold. I wanted to hold him, to weep in his little arms, but he flinched when I reached out. "Mum," he said awkwardly. "You smell different." My heart shattered. But I kept playing the part. I wore dark glasses. Carried a cane. Walked slowly, bumping into things, even though I could see every crack in the floorboard. I memorized the house again, where Fiona kept her shoes, how Edward no longer drank tea but wine, how Henry's drawings now had 3 figures, not 2. At night, I crept out of bed and watched them from the stairs. Fiona laughed like she owned the place. Edward looked at her like he never looked at me. And my son called her, Mum, when he thought I couldn't hear. Once, I caught a glimpse of Fiona slipping something into Edward's drink. He didn't seem to notice. But I did. The betrayal wasn't just in their actions, it was in their comfort. Their ease. Like I had never existed. Like I had died 5 years ago and they'd simply replaced me. I started keeping notes. Little things. Dates. Words. Photos. And then I found it. In the study drawer, hidden beneath tax files, was a birth certificate. A forged one. With Henry's name. But not mine. It listed Fiona as the mother. I stood there, holding it, my hands trembling. That's when I knew. They were not just stealing my son. They were trying to erase me completely. But I didn't cry. No, not yet. Because I had a plan. And for it to work, they had to believe I was still blind. A week passed. By then, I had memorized their routine, every kiss they thought I didn't see, every whisper behind closed doors. Edward left for work at 9. Fiona would hum through the house barefoot, making herself comfortable in robes I once wore. She rearranged the living room, discarded my favorite vase, and filled the shelves with her books. Books she never read. Henry spent most afternoons with her. She walked him to school. She picked him up. She made him sandwiches with the crusts cut off, just the way I used to. My role, it seemed, had been replaced in every detail. But I wasn't gone. I was watching. And I was remembering. One evening, I stood before the mirror in the guest bathroom. The one they thought I wouldn't use. I took off the dark glasses and looked at myself for the first time in what felt like years. I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Pale. Thinner. Eyes that had once held joy now rimmed with quiet fury. But still me. Still Amelia. I leaned in, speaking to the reflection like it was a stranger I once loved. You're not finished yet. That night, I decided it was time to test them. I stumbled deliberately into the dining table, knocking over a glass. Fiona rushed in, annoyed. Not concerned, annoyed. Can't you be more careful, she snapped, picking up the pieces with a sharp sigh. I muttered an apology, my voice trembling, eyes vacant like I truly couldn't see her. Her lips curled into a smile. She believed it. Later, when Edward came home, I sat beside him on the sofa and reached out for his hand. He tensed. Darling, I said softly, would you mind helping me find my slippers? There was a pause. A long, painful pause. He didn't move. But Fiona did. I'll get them, she said quickly, before Edward could speak. Then, with a smug glance, she added, they were under my bed this morning. My bed. My room. My life. She was claiming everything. And still, I stayed silent. Because my silence was my weapon. I began planting seeds. Little phrases around Henry, about the park we used to visit, his favorite lullaby, his blue elephant toy hidden in the attic. How do you know that? He asked once, eyes wide. I remember everything, darling, I whispered. Even if I can't see it. He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was all I needed. Doubt is powerful. Especially in the mind of a child. And it would only grow. Especially once I found the old video camera in the loft. Fully charged. Fully working. And full of proof. The camera sat in the corner of the attic, its lens facing the dim, cluttered room. I had almost forgotten about it, tucked away beneath a pile of old photo albums and cardboard boxes. But now, it seemed to beckon me, its silence speaking louder than any words. I wiped away the dust with my sleeve and pressed the play button. At first, there was just darkness. Then, the image flickered into focus. It was a video from years ago, one of our family holidays. There was Edward, younger then, laughing. Henry, a toddler, holding onto my hand, his eyes wide with wonder as we walked along the beach. It was pure joy. The kind of joy that now seemed like a distant memory. I almost stopped the video, but I couldn't. I had to watch. I needed to see what had been captured in the years before everything fell apart. The camera shifted. It was late afternoon. Fiona appeared, smiling, walking down the hallway. Edward followed behind her, his hand resting on her back, his body language a little too familiar. The sight took my breath away. I hadn't realized how deeply their betrayal cut until that very moment. There they were, unapologetic, their faces lit with the kind of closeness I had once shared with Edward. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. But I didn't stop watching. Fiona entered the kitchen, where I was supposed to be standing, preparing dinner. The camera focused on her for a while, capturing her laughter, her flirtatious glances toward Edward, who stood in the doorway. It was too much. My hands shook as I pressed pause. A part of me wanted to destroy the tape, to forget I'd ever seen it, but another part of me knew I couldn't. This was the proof I needed. But I couldn't confront them yet. Not just yet. I needed to gather more. The next day, I took the camera with me when I went to pick Henry up from school. The weather had turned cooler, and as I stood in the parking lot, waiting for him to come out, I noticed Fiona walking toward me from the other side. She was on her phone, oblivious to my presence, and I used that moment to slip the camera into her bag, careful not to alert her. By the time we reached the car, I had everything I needed. It was only a matter of time before I confronted them, and when I did, it would be their turn to watch. It wasn't until the following evening that I finally gathered the courage to confront them. The house was unusually quiet, a stillness that hung in the air like a thick fog. Edward had come home late, as usual, and Fiona had been spending more time at the office, claiming she was caught up with work. But tonight, everything would change. Tonight, they would face what they had done. I'd arranged everything carefully. The living room was set up with the camera, the tape, and a projector. The faint hum of the machine was the only sound in the room as I waited for them to arrive. Edward came in first. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Something wrong?" he asked, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I said nothing, simply motioning for him to sit down. His eyes narrowed, but he complied, settling into the armchair across from me. A few moments later, Fiona walked in, her face lighting up with a fake smile. "Edward, darling, what's going on?" she asked, her voice smooth, like honey. She glanced at me, but I could see the unease flickering in her eyes. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I picked up the remote and pressed play. The first video started. Edward's face immediately dropped as he recognized the footage. His smirk disappeared, replaced by confusion and a hint of panic. Fiona, too, went pale, her eyes darting between me and the screen. The footage played on, revealing everything, every detail of their betrayal. The way Fiona had walked down the hall, the way she had looked at Edward. The laughter they shared, the intimacy that was never meant to be captured. And then the second video began. It was from the same holiday, the one where they thought I was unaware. The one where Fiona had kissed Edward in the kitchen, thinking no one was watching. I paused the video. "Do you want to explain this?" I asked, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. Edward swallowed hard. "Look, Marissa, this isn't what it looks like. Fiona and I." "Don't you dare lie to me," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I've seen everything. The way you two have been sneaking around behind my back. You think I didn't know?" Fiona's face twisted in discomfort. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She looked at Edward, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But only for a moment. Edward finally stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane, Marissa. You're overreacting." I didn't flinch. "I don't think I am. You both crossed a line. And now you have to live with the consequences." I stood up slowly, walking toward the door. "You're free to go. Both of you. But don't come back. I'm done." I didn't wait for their response. I didn't need to. The decision had already been made. The power was in my hands now. As I stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against my face. The weight I had been carrying for so long suddenly seemed lighter. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. One where I wouldn't let anyone walk over me ever again. The days that followed were a blur. Edward and Fiona didn't try to contact me. They knew better. I had made it clear in that moment that I wasn't someone to be crossed, not anymore. But the silence was deafening. The weight of it all began to settle deep within me. I had freed myself from them, but in doing so, I had opened a door to a whole new set of challenges. It wasn't until a week later that I received a letter from Edward. The envelope was formal, the handwriting neat, as if to maintain some semblance of dignity in the face of his betrayal. I hesitated before opening it, the same reluctance I had felt when I first uncovered his lies. But I needed to know what he had to say. The letter began with an apology. A long, drawn-out apology that seemed insincere, as if he was merely trying to appease his own guilt. He wrote about how he never meant for things to get this far, and how he never wanted to hurt me. He claimed that Fiona had manipulated him, that it was all her fault. The usual excuses, the same tired lines I had heard 100 times before. But then, towards the end, there was a line that caught my eye. He wrote, "I don't want to lose everything, Marissa. Please, can we talk? I still love you." That last sentence struck me, not with the softness of love, but with the weight of desperation. Edward was not sorry for what he had done, he was sorry for the consequences of his actions. He was trying to hold on to the life he had before, the life I had built for him. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I let the letter fall onto the coffee table, staring at it for a long while. My heart didn't break. Instead, a sense of clarity washed over me. I knew now, more than ever, that I had made the right choice. There was no going back. Not for him, not for us. The next day, I found myself in a meeting with a lawyer, finalizing the divorce. It wasn't something I had anticipated doing so quickly, but the decision had become inevitable. As we sat across from one another, the lawyer asked me one final question before we could proceed. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, looking at me with a careful, assessing gaze. I looked back at him, the same sense of resolve settling over me that I had felt when I walked away from them both. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I'm sure." The process was quicker than I expected. The paperwork was signed, and within days, I was no longer tied to Edward in any way. The weight of his betrayal, of everything that had come before, lifted off my shoulders like a heavy burden being removed. I was free. But freedom wasn't just about being rid of Edward and Fiona. It was about reclaiming my life. I could finally breathe without the constant suffocation of their lies, of their deception. It was time to rediscover who I was, to rebuild myself from the ground up. I spent the following weeks doing just that, rediscovering passions I had abandoned, revisiting old friendships that had been pushed aside. I took long walks by the river, spent afternoons in art galleries, and even began to take dance classes. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive again. But life wasn't all about new beginnings. The reality of what had happened still lingered, like an invisible shadow at the back of my mind. There were days when I would catch myself wondering if I had done the right thing. If I had been too harsh. If maybe, just maybe, there had been a chance to fix things. But those thoughts were fleeting. I knew deep down that there was no fixing it. What was broken could never be repaired, not this time. A few months passed, and life continued on. I found peace, not in revenge or in the hope of reconciliation, but in the acceptance that some things were beyond repair. And that was okay. Then one afternoon, as I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping on a cappuccino, I saw Edward. He walked past the window, his face weary, his posture slumped. For a brief moment, our eyes met, but I didn't look away. I didn't need to. There was nothing left between us, not anymore. I turned back to my coffee, a small smile tugging at my lips. I was finally free. And no matter what Edward or Fiona had hoped, I knew that nothing would ever bring me back to them.